This is Republican Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, whom you may know from his many, many cameos in Congress's January 6th investigation. In fact, Scott Perry turned out to be so entangled in Donald Trump's attempts to stay in office after losing the 2020 election, the January 6th committee took the unprecedented step of subpoenaing him, a fellow member of Congress, a subpoena that Congressman Perry promptly blew off. Last year, the FBI seized Scott Perry's phone as part of the federal criminal investigation of January 6th. And since then, special counsel Jack Smith and Scott Perry have been in a legal battle over exactly what communications federal prosecutors are allowed to access on Mr. Perry's phone. Well, now, in what appears to have been a clerical error, the appeals court briefly posted online a document that describes and quotes from a whole bunch of those communications from Perry's phone. And oh boy, they sure would seem to confirm that Congressman Scott Perry was right in the middle of Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election. To quote Politico's headline, court filing reveals Representative Scott Perry's vast web of contacts in bid to reverse 2020 election. For instance, there are the texts Perry exchanged with Jeffrey Clark, the obscure Trump Justice Department official who Perry had introduced to Trump as someone who could help with the effort to overturn the election. Trump found Mr. Clark so helpful, in fact, that in late December 2020, Trump made it known he was planning to install Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general, so Trump could use the Justice Department to push his stolen election claims. In these newly revealed communications, we learned that Scott Perry texted Jeffrey Clark late on December 30th to tell Clark that President Trump seemed happy with him, suggesting the plan to elevate Clark to the top of the DOJ was moving forward. Clark replied, quote, "I'm praying. This makes me quite nervous and wonder if I'm worthy or ready." To which Perry responded, "You are the man. I have confirmed it. God does what he does for a reason." In addition to telling Clark that he had been chosen by God to take over the Justice Department for Donald Trump, Perry also told Clark that Trump would give Clark a presidential security clearance to access intelligence about the election. And Congressman Perry was busy strategizing with lots of people to try and keep Donald Trump in power. He was texting with top Trump administration and campaign officials, as well as legislators in his home state of Pennsylvania, about various ways Joe Biden's victory might be overturned in that state, in Pennsylvania, and beyond. Joining me now is Devlin Barrett, national security and law enforcement reporter for The Washington Post. Devlin, thanks so much for being here. Scott Perry, very much the sort of Where's Waldo in the scene inside the Capitol and outside the Capitol unfolding in and around January 6th. Can you talk about the role he played in choosing Jeffrey Clark and helping to elevate him to be a potential AG?
Right. So one of the ways in which the time period we're talking about was so strange, which it was, people were really confused. People within the Justice Department were really confused. How did Jeff Clark come to the president's attention? Jeff Clark was essentially an environmental lawyer. And it wasn't clear even to people who were running the department why Jeff Clark was suddenly a person of such interest to President Trump. And now we understand much better from this perhaps accidentally unsealed filing why that is, because Perry was apparently acting as a go-between between the president and Clark. And so that sort of fills in a big blank and a big sort of question mark as to how all this came to be. And really what you see Perry helping sort of navigate this weird budding relationship between Clark and President Trump.
I was surprised to see trepidation on the part of Jeffrey Clark, a man who was so very much going against the grain of what basically every other legal mind thought as far as the Trump's ability to overturn the results of the election. Can you tell me anything more about the sort of coaching role that Scott Perry played in trying to reassure Jeffrey Clark that God was on his side and the doubts that existed in Jeff Clark's mind as he sought to run the Justice Department?
Right. Well, we really don't have a great sense of why these two were so immediately open with each other on this level, because Clark is expressing doubts about his own ability to pursue this, and Perry is saying, no, you are essentially the perfect person to do this. But I do think that the back and forth shows a number of things. One is which One of which I think is a really odd quirk of this whole thing is the discussion of tickets. And tickets in this context they have a discussion about Clark wants a ticket, and Perry says he will try to get him one. And that is a discussion about security clearances. And what they're really talking about is the desire to get access to classified information that they think will help make their argument that this election was stolen. Now, we know through a whole range of people who were in the intelligence community at that time that there was no meaningful intelligence that would help Trump's argument here. But I think it's really interesting that Perry and Clark were both so focused at that time on getting classified intelligence that they thought would make their argument, in part because clearly there was no public information that would help them make this case.
Right.
And it really shows the degree to which they were, desperate. They were looking for anything that might help them make an argument that didn't make sense.
It just becomes clear in your reporting that Scott Perry is playing a very strange role here as someone that's trying to help install this sort of random justice official and coach him through the process to be the attorney general. He's someone that has conversations with Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. After those conversations, Meadows, according to Cassidy Hutchinson, starts burning documents in the fireplace. I think I'm getting that right. And then Perry asks reportedly for a preemptive pardon from Donald Trump. I mean, he is sort of a Zelig-like figure here, finding himself, I'm using that in the passive sense, putting himself in these situations of apparently key import. I wonder why you think he has thus far evaded his own criminal indictment.
Well, it's a really interesting question because, again, remember, as you pointed out, Clark has been indicted in Georgia. Clark is an unindicted co-conspirator in their federal case in Washington. Yet from these texts, we see that Perry is a really important go-between between Clark and President Trump. So it's a fair question to ask, why hasn't he faced more of a sort of public accounting from prosecutors? But I will say, the whole reason we're seeing these texts and the whole reason this legal issue exists is because it's very clear that the special counsel has been looking very closely at Perry. And there has been a whole legal argument around the legal protection surrounding members of Congress that protects Perry a little bit more than other people. And that may explain some of why he has not been named in the way you're talking about. But I also think you can't assume he's out of the woods because, as these texts show, he's right in the middle of some of the most concerning conversations to prosecutors.
Yeah, I got to say, in that vein, he's not the only one that's so far skated away from a federal indictment, or is skating parallel perhaps to a federal criminal indictment. Mike Johnson is also someone, the current Speaker of the House, who Mark Elias says in his bid to get 147 Republicans to sign on to this amicus brief, other than former President Donald Trump, Mike Johnson is arguably the most culpable federal elected official in what transpired on January 6, 2021.